It was 3 in the morning somewhere in Oklahoma. Blake Shelton was being wheeled through the doors of a local hospital, looking like a man who had completely run out of road. And at that exact same moment, 1,000 miles away in Los Angeles, his wife Gwen Stefani was standing on a red carpet with cameras flashing all around her, smiling like everything in her world was perfectly fine. Nobody outside their inner circle knew what had really happened between them in the hours before. Nobody knew about the argument, the silence, the pain, and nobody had any idea that a 92-second voice recording was about to leak onto the internet and blow the whole thing wide open. When that audio started spreading online, fans everywhere lost their minds. Hashtags went viral within hours. People started demanding answers, and when Gwen finally stepped onto a private jet headed for Oklahoma, she had absolutely no idea she was about to walk into the most honest and difficult conversation of her entire life. Before we go any further, if you are new here and you enjoy real stories about real people told without the usual tabloid nonsense, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. We dig into what actually happens behind the headlines, the stuff the magazines leave out, and the moments that never make it onto camera. You will not want to miss what comes next in this story, so subscribe and let us get into it. To really understand how things got to that hospital room at 3 in the morning, you have to go back to where it all started. Back to 2015, when The Voice was one of the most watched shows on American television, and two very different people found themselves sitting in matching red chairs, trying to hold their lives together while the whole country watched. Blake Shelton was already a massive name in country music by that point. He had the charm, the southern drawl, the jokes, the whole package. But behind all of that easy likability, he was going through something really rough. His very public divorce had made him front-page news for all the wrong reasons. Tabloids had picked apart every detail of his personal life, and he was doing his best to keep smiling through it, even when he was quietly falling apart inside. Then Gwen Stefani walked onto that set. She was the California pop icon with the platinum blonde hair and the kind of stage presence that fills up rooms even when she is just standing still. She had built an entire career on reinventing herself, starting with No Doubt and then going solo and never really stopping. But at that time, her marriage had also just ended in a way she never saw coming. She was hurting too, just in a different way and in a different world from Blake's. Here's something that actually surprised a lot of people when it came out. Gwen had never really heard of Blake Shelton before joining the show, one of the biggest country artists in America, and she genuinely did not know his name. They came from completely different musical worlds, different coasts, different everything, and yet somehow, in the middle of all that brokenness, they found each other. Their first interactions were not some magical Hollywood movie moment. It was actually kind of awkward at the start. Two people who were both carrying a lot of weight, sitting in those chairs and supposed to be focused on helping other artists while their own lives were quietly crumbling in the background. But over those long filming days, something real started happening between them. They started actually talking to each other. Not the usual celebrity small talk where everyone is performing for the cameras. Real conversations, the kind where you look up and realize 2 hours have passed and you forgot anyone else was even in the room. Blake said in an interview not long after that Gwen had kept him from hitting rock bottom. He meant it literally. She had pulled him back from a darkness he was not sure he could find his way out of alone. And Gwen said much the same thing about him. Two people who were both drowning somehow managed to find each other right in the middle of the storm, and together they managed to stay afloat. The public fell in love with them almost immediately. Their chemistry on the show felt genuine because it was genuine. Fans would tune in just to watch them interact. The playful back and forth, the way Blake could make Gwen laugh until she could barely breathe, the looks they exchanged when they thought the cameras were pointed somewhere else. It was the kind of thing you cannot fake, and people recognized that. But fame has a way of taking something beautiful and turning it into something it was never meant to be. TV producers saw their love story and saw ratings. Magazines saw their relationship and saw covers. Music networks wanted duets. Their love, which had started as something quiet and private and genuinely healing, slowly became a product, a brand, something that existed not just between two people, but for an audience of millions. And that's when things started to shift in ways that were hard to see at first. Their differences, which had once felt like the best parts of being together, started creating distance. Gwen had built her career on constant reinvention. She thrived on change, on pushing herself into new territory, on staying relevant in an industry that forgets people without a second thought. That drive was in her bones. It was how she had survived everything. Blake was almost the opposite. He found peace in staying the same. The ranch in Oklahoma, the dirt roads, the routines that reminded him of who he was before fame came along and complicated everything. He was not interested in changing his sound or chasing trends or becoming something he was not. His authenticity was his foundation, and he was not willing to trade it for anything. For a while, those differences had balanced them. They brought out sides of each other they needed. But over time, what once complemented each other started to pull in opposite directions. Gwen was spending more time in Los Angeles, throwing herself into music and her fashion line. Blake was retreating to the ranch more and more, saying he was just tired of the noise. They were not fighting constantly, which might have actually made things easier to deal with. Instead, they were just drifting, slowly, quietly, the way two boats can start a journey side by side and end up miles apart without anyone making a single dramatic move. People close to them started noticing things. Fans on social media noticed things too, because fans always notice. Gwen stopped liking certain posts. Blake missed one of her Las Vegas shows, something he had never done before. The internet picked up on all of it and started running with theories. Meanwhile, the couple kept doing what famous couples do. They smiled through interviews, they held hands on red carpets, they posted the kind of photos that look perfect because they are carefully chosen to look that way. Performing happiness, even when happiness is the last thing they are actually feeling. Then came the night in Oklahoma that changed everything. Blake had just finished a run of shows and was exhausted in that deep, bone-tired way that goes beyond just needing sleep. Gwen had been locked in the studio for weeks working on new music. The plan was to meet up at the ranch, get away from everything, reconnect as two actual people instead of two public figures. It seemed simple enough. But when Gwen arrived, something felt off. Blake seemed distant in a way she could not quite name. They tried to talk, but the conversation felt forced and hollow. Months of small, unresolved things, quiet resentments, words left unsaid were all just hanging in the air between them, like a storm that had not yet broken. Then Gwen saw a message come through on Blake's phone. It's important to be clear about what that message actually was, because the story got twisted a lot in the retelling. It was not a romantic message. It was from a female collaborator he had been working with on a project. Friendly, personal, maybe a little too casual, given the already fragile state of things between them. But after months of feeling like she was slowly losing him, that message became the match that lit everything on fire. She brought it up, he responded, and what started as a conversation quickly became something neither of them could step back from. Neighbors later said they heard raised voices carrying through the quiet Oklahoma night. That was unusual on its own. Blake and Gwen were known for laughing together, not for arguments that could be heard from outside. But that night, everything that had been quietly building for months finally broke the surface. By the next morning, Blake was gone. He checked himself into a local hospital. His team said it was stress-related exhaustion and dehydration, but the people who saw him there described someone who looked like much more than that. Defeated, empty, a man who had been carrying too much for too long and had finally just run out of the strength to keep going. When the news got out, fans were blindsided. This couple that had come to represent second chances and healing and real love suddenly looked fragile in a way nobody was prepared for. People started wondering, maybe for the first time, out loud, whether the fairy tale had been falling apart behind closed doors for a long time already. And then the question that took over the internet: where was Gwen? Because photos started surfacing of her at a fashion event in Los Angeles that same weekend. She was smiling, she was radiant, she looked like a woman who did not have a single worry in the world. The contrast between those images and the image of her husband alone in a hospital room 1,000 miles away was brutal.
Tabloids ran with it hard. Hashtags demanding answers started trending worldwide. Fans who had loved her for years turned on her almost overnight. Every hour she stayed silent became another headline. Every smile in those photos became evidence used against her character. What the internet did not see was what was actually happening behind those closed doors. Gwen had not slept properly in days. She was falling apart in private while trying desperately to hold herself together in public. She hadn't issued a statement because she didn't even know where to begin. The person she would normally turn to in a crisis was the person she was in a crisis with. Fame does this to people. It strips away your humanity and turns you into a character in a story that belongs to everyone else. Your real pain becomes content, your silence becomes guilt, and the people who used to cheer for you feel completely entitled to judge you the moment you stop performing the version of yourself they fell in love with. But while the headlines kept coming and the comment sections kept tearing her apart, Gwen was quietly making a decision. Late one night, without telling anyone except the pilot, she boarded a private jet headed to Oklahoma. No security team, no publicist, no stylist, no entourage of any kind. Just her in a hoodie with the hood pulled low and a desperate need to see the man she was terrified she might have already lost. She came in through a side entrance. A nurse who spoke about it later, anonymously, described her as trembling but determined, like someone who had finally stopped running from the hardest conversation of her life and was walking straight into it instead.
When she stepped into his room, Blake looked small in a way she had never seen him look before. Pale, exhausted, temporarily emptied of all the big energy that usually filled up whatever room he walked into. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she said 3 words, quietly, that the people who witnessed it said they would never forget. Nobody has reported exactly what those words were, which honestly makes the moment feel more real, not less. Some things are not meant to be broadcast. Blake reached across the bed and took her hand. That was it. No grand declaration, no instant forgiveness, just that one small gesture that said enough to make the next conversation possible. But anyone who has ever tried to repair something broken knows that a gesture, no matter how meaningful, is just a starting point. The voice memo had changed things even further. 92 seconds of Blake's voice, recorded at some point during all of this, had made its way onto the internet. Nobody knows exactly how it got out. Some blamed a hospital employee, others suspected hackers. But within hours, millions of people had heard something that was clearly never meant for public consumption. What surprised everyone about that recording was the tone of it. He was not angry. He was not accusing anyone of anything. His voice was quiet and cracked and deeply tired. It sounded like someone who had spent years being strong for everyone around him and had finally run out of the energy to keep pretending. People could not agree on what it meant. Was it a goodbye? Was it a cry for help? Was he saying the relationship was over or asking for it to be saved? Morning shows brought in experts to analyze his word choices. Psychologists commented on his mental state. The whole thing got picked apart endlessly. And through all of that noise, Gwen said nothing publicly. No statement, no denial, no social media acknowledgement. Her silence became the loudest thing of all, and most people decided they already knew what it meant. Around that time, someone unexpected showed up at Blake's hospital room. The pastor who had officiated their wedding. He had known Blake for years, had watched him fall in love with Gwen, and had genuinely believed in what they had together. He walked into that room without any fanfare and just sat down and did what good pastors do. He listened. They talked for hours, not about the headlines or the leaked audio or the public fallout. They talked about forgiveness, about whether it was possible to love someone and be deeply hurt by that same person at the same time and have both of those things be completely true, about what healing actually looks like when the cameras are off and nobody is watching. At some point, the pastor asked Blake one straight and simple question. Can you forgive her? Blake did not answer quickly, but when he did, his voice cracked a little as he said that he had already forgiven her. The forgetting, though, that was going to take a lot longer. And honestly, that might be the most human thing said out loud about heartbreak in a very long time. Forgiveness can happen in a moment. Healing from real pain takes much longer than that.
Knowing the difference between the two is what separates the people who make it through hard things from the ones who do not. Something loosened in Blake after that conversation, not all the way, but enough that when Gwen's late-night messages started coming through to his phone, he found himself actually wanting to respond. What followed was not a movie-style reconciliation. There was no single dramatic moment where everything clicked back into place and the music swelled. What happened was quieter than that and more real. Text messages at 2 in the morning, phone calls that stretched on for hours, conversations where both of them actually listened instead of just waiting for an opening to defend themselves. They both started therapy around that time, separately at first, each working through their own stuff before they could really work through it together. Gwen dug into the part of herself that needed to control everything, that had spent so long in an industry that punishes imperfection that control had become her default setting, even in her most personal relationships. Blake looked honestly at why he had chosen to go silent and retreat, rather than say the things that needed to be said while there was still time to say them. Neither of those things is easy to face about yourself. Most people avoid that kind of self-examination their whole lives because it means sitting with the least flattering truths about who you are. Both of them did the work anyway. Their relationship was not going to go back to what it had been before all this. That version of things was gone. But what was slowly being built in its place had something the earlier version had been missing. It was grounded in honesty instead of performance. It was two people choosing each other with full knowledge of the mess rather than in spite of it. The story of Blake and Gwen is not really a cautionary tale, and it's not a fairy tale either. It's something more useful than both of those things. It's a real story about what happens when two people who genuinely love each other still manage to lose their way. About how fame can take something private and sacred and turn it into a product that no longer belongs to the people it's supposed to be about. About how silence can become just as damaging as any argument, how the words you never say can do just as much damage as the ones you do. It's also a story about what it actually takes to find your way back, not grand gestures or public declarations, but the quieter, harder work of being willing to be honest about your own failures, to ask for forgiveness and mean it, to extend forgiveness and mean that too, even when the forgetting part is going to take a long time. Most of us will never have our worst moments photographed and turned into trending hashtags. We will not have experts on morning television analyzing the tone of our voicemails. Most of us have felt that slow drift away from someone we once couldn't imagine living without. Most of us have said something in anger that we wished we could take back. Most of us have stayed silent at exactly the moment we should have spoken up. And most of us know that love, real love, is not the easy feeling you have in the beginning when everything is new and exciting. It's the decision you make in the hard moments to stay and do the work even when walking away would be so much simpler. Blake and Gwen's story is a reminder that even the relationships that look the most charmed from the outside are built by real people navigating real pain, and that the moments that matter most are never the ones on the red carpet. They're the ones nobody sees. The 3 a.m. phone calls, the quiet handheld in a hospital room, the honest conversation you have when the performance is finally over and there's nothing left between two people but the truth. Real love doesn't live in the highlight reel. It lives in the shadows, in the hard chapters, in the willingness to keep showing up for someone even when everything in you wants to stop. And sometimes those shadows, when you're brave enough to walk through them together, are exactly where the strongest versions of love are actually built.
vicious argument that neither one of them could seem to walk away from. Neighbors actually reported later that they heard raised voices echoing through that quiet Oklahoma night. Such a rare sound coming from a couple who was usually known for all their laughter together. People close to them described the whole scene as completely raw and emotional. Two people who genuinely loved each other so deeply, but had finally reached an absolute breaking point. By the next morning, Blake was just gone. He checked himself into a local hospital for what his team officially called stress-related exhaustion and dehydration. But people who actually saw him there said it was clearly more than just that. He looked completely drained of everything, defeated. Like a man carrying this weight around that words alone couldn't even begin to explain. When news about his hospitalization finally broke, fans everywhere were totally blindsided by it. The couple who had always symbolized second chances and healed hearts suddenly looked so fragile, so human, so breakable. And for the first time ever, people really started wondering if maybe the fairy tale was actually falling apart behind closed doors. But here's the part that made the entire internet completely lose its mind over this whole thing. Where the heck was Gwen? Photos started surfacing from that exact same weekend, showing Gwen at this fashion event out in Los Angeles, smiling, looking radiant, looking like a woman without a single care in the whole world. Meanwhile, her husband was supposedly recovering in some Oklahoma hospital, 1,000 miles away from her. The contrast between those two images was absolutely devastating to see. Tabloids started running headlines that just dripped with accusation and judgment. Where is Gwen? Became the question literally everyone was asking online. Thousands upon thousands of comments kept demanding answers from her. Fans who had celebrated their love story for years were now questioning Gwen's loyalty, her character as a person, her actual heart. Every single hour of her silence became another headline somewhere. Every smile caught in those photos became another piece of evidence being used against her. But here's what the internet didn't actually see happening. Behind those closed doors, Gwen was completely falling apart inside. Friends said she literally hadn't slept in days at that point. She was trying so desperately to hold herself together while the entire world seemed to be turning against her all at once. Fame really has this awful way of just stripping away your basic humanity. You stop being a real person and become some character in other people's stories instead. Your genuine pain becomes their entertainment. Your silence becomes evidence of guilt. And Gwen Stefani, this pop icon who had already survived so much hardship in her life, was now facing harsh judgment from the exact same audience that used to celebrate everything about her. But what absolutely nobody knew at that moment was that she was about to do something that would change everything completely. Something nobody saw coming at all. And it all started with one late-night phone call and a private jet headed straight for Oklahoma. That voice memo really did change absolutely everything. 92 seconds of Blake Shelton's voice, sounding so tired and fragile, just spread across the entire internet like complete wildfire. Nobody really knows exactly how it ended up leaking out there. Some people say maybe a hospital staff member did it. Others are blaming hackers for it. But within just a few hours, literally millions of people had heard something that was clearly never ever meant for public ears to hear. The recording wasn't angry at all, and honestly, that's what surprised everybody the most about it. Blake wasn't yelling or throwing accusations around. His voice was just quiet throughout the whole thing. Almost haunting, really. The words sounded like they came from somewhere really deep and really broken inside him. Like a man who had spent years being the strong one for everyone else, was finally admitting out loud that he had absolutely nothing left to give anymore. Comment sections everywhere just exploded with all these different interpretations of what it meant. Was this some kind of goodbye? Was it a cry for help? Was Blake saying the relationship was officially over? Or was he begging for it to somehow be saved? Nobody could seem to agree on anything. The media started dissecting every single pause in the audio, every breath he took, every word he chose to use. Morning shows were bringing on actual experts to analyze his tone of voice. Psychologists started offering their professional opinions about his mental state. And through all of that chaos, Gwen just said absolutely nothing at all. No official statement from her team. No denial of anything. Not even a simple social media post acknowledging that any of this was even happening. That silence of hers ended up becoming the loudest response of all. Some people saw it as her admitting guilt. Others thought she was just totally confused and didn't know what to do. A few people tried defending her, saying she was just trying to protect her privacy during all this. But most folks out there had already made up their minds completely about who the story. Here's what actually ended up happening next, though. And I promise you, it's really not what anybody was expecting at all. Late one night, while all those headlines were still raging and fans everywhere were busy speculating about everything, Gwen finally made a decision. Without telling a single person except for the pilot, she got on a private flight headed straight for Oklahoma. No security team with her. No stylist tagging along, no entourage whatsoever. Just Gwen wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled down low and this desperate, overwhelming need to see the man. She was absolutely terrified she might have lost forever. She went into the hospital through this side entrance that the staff there agreed to keep totally quiet about. One nurse who ended up speaking anonymously about it later described Gwen as trembling, but still somehow determined. Like a woman who had finally just stopped running away from the hardest conversation of her entire life. When she stepped into Blake's room that night, the man who usually filled up entire arenas with his big presence looked really small lying there. Pale, so tired. The life just temporarily drained right out of his eyes. Gwen stood there in the doorway for what probably felt like forever to her. Then she whispered something that the people who witnessed it said they'll honestly never forget hearing. Just 3 simple words that somehow carried all the weight of everything the two of them had been through together. And for the longest time after that, neither one of them said anything at all. No cameras there capturing this moment. No headlines getting written about it. Just 2 human beings totally stripped of all their fame and pretense, finally actually seeing each other clearly for once. Then Blake slowly reached across that hospital bed and took her hand in his. That one single gesture said literally everything that words couldn't say right then. It wasn't instant forgiveness or anything like that. It wasn't some promise that everything was suddenly going to be okay between them. But it was definitely a crack in the wall that had built up. A real possibility of something more. The first genuinely honest moment they had actually shared together in months. But here's the thing you gotta understand about broken trust between 2 people. You can totally forgive someone and still have absolutely no idea how to actually move forward from there with them. The damage had already been done at that point. Not really by any single argument or that message she found on his phone, but by all those months and years of 2 people slowly becoming complete strangers to each other, while still pretending like they were totally in love. Remember what I mentioned earlier about the control thing? Well, this is really where it starts mattering the most. Gwen Stefani had built her whole empire on absolute precision in everything she did. Every outfit she wore was calculated perfectly. Every single career move was completely intentional. Perfection wasn't about vanity for her at all. It was pure survival in an industry that just devours imperfect women without showing any mercy whatsoever. But that exact same need for control had slowly seeped its way into her relationship without her even realizing it was happening. Friends close to them revealed that Gwen had been kind of pushing Blake to evolve as an artist, to expand way beyond just country music, to try appealing to these wider audiences and stay relevant as times kept changing. She genuinely believed that reinvention was exactly how you survived in the entertainment business. It was how she herself had survived all those years. But for Blake, those suggestions she kept making just felt like rejection of who he really was. Like she was basically saying the authentic, real version of himself simply wasn't good enough for her anymore. One night during this really intense argument between them, Gwen apparently said something that cut way deeper than she ever realized it would. Words that pretty much told Blake he was the one holding both of them back from greater things. She really didn't mean it as some kind of attack on him. She honestly meant it as motivation to push him forward. But to him sitting there hearing those words, it felt like the woman he loved more than anything was asking him to completely become someone he just wasn't. After that whole argument happened, Blake just withdrew into himself completely. He started spending more days out at the ranch totally alone, disconnected from all the spotlight stuff and getting increasingly disconnected from Gwen herself too. The silence growing between them just kept getting louder and louder until it became way more deafening than any argument they'd ever had could have been. They weren't really fighting with each other anymore at that point. They had simply just run out of things left to say. Meanwhile, out in the public eye, the backlash coming at Gwen had reached this absolute fever pitch level. Hashtags calling for justice for Blake were trending all over the world. Fans who used to adore her had turned into harsh critics practically overnight. Tabloids kept running story after story, painting her as this cold, ambitious woman who was totally incapable of real, genuine love. The exact same woman who had once been celebrated everywhere for her incredible strength, was now getting crucified for those very same qualities. What the public definitely didn't get to see was Gwen barely sleeping at all anymore, deleting old photos of her and Blake together because just looking at them hurt way too much now, completely avoiding all social media because every single comment felt like yet another wound being inflicted. Her therapist apparently said later that she was just consumed by guilt over everything, replaying every single mistake she ever made in her head, over and over until she couldn't even think straight anymore. And then this totally unexpected person showed up at Blake's hospital room one day. Someone who ended up asking him one simple question that would change absolutely everything.
Don't have to leave this town to see the world.
The pastor who had actually officiated Blake and Gwen's wedding ceremony walked right into that hospital room without any cameras or announcements about it. He had known Blake personally for years at that point, had watched him fall head over heels in love with Gwen, had blessed their union together, truly believing it was going to last forever. Now here he was, sitting beside this broken man, just doing what good pastors do best. He simply listened to him. They ended up talking for hours that day about literally everything except fame or music, or those crazy headlines circulating everywhere. They talked about forgiveness and what it actually really means deep down, about whether loving someone and being deeply hurt by that same person can somehow exist together in one heart at the same time. After this really long stretch of silence between them, the pastor finally asked Blake one simple, straightforward question. Can you forgive her? Blake's answer came out slowly, his voice cracking a bit as he admitted something really profound in that moment. He said he'd already forgiven her, actually, but the forgetting part, that was going to take him a whole lot longer to work through. And honestly, I think that's got to be one of the most genuinely human things anyone has ever said about real heartbreak. Forgiveness can totally happen in just a single moment sometimes, but actual healing from the wounds, that takes an entire lifetime. Something really shifted inside Blake after that conversation with the pastor. All that anger that had been slowly poisoning him started to finally release its grip a little bit. Not completely gone or anything like that, but definitely enough that he could actually breathe again. Enough that when Gwen's late-night text messages started coming through to his phone, he actually felt like responding to them this time. The days right after that weren't some big dramatic movie-style reconciliation or anything. There weren't any grand romantic gestures being made or public declarations of love happening. What actually happened instead was way quieter than all that. Way more real. Random text messages sent back and forth at like 2 in the morning. Phone calls that ended up lasting for hours at a time. Real conversations where they actually genuinely listened to each other, instead of just waiting for their turn to get defensive. Both of them ended up starting therapy around then too. Separately at first, just for themselves individually. Learning how all that fame and constant pressure and deep fears had shaped them into these versions of themselves they didn't even recognize anymore. Gwen really confronted her whole need for control over everything in her life. Blake seriously examined why he had chosen to retreat and go silent instead of just communicating openly with her. They both did that really hard, uncomfortable work that most people try to avoid because it means facing the absolute ugliest parts of who you are. There wasn't any instant fairy tale ending waiting for them at the end of all that. But there was real, genuine effort being put in. This willingness to actually try understanding each other rather than just winning every argument. A real recognition that love by itself isn't nearly enough if you're not actually willing to grow right alongside the person you love. Their whole story had completely stopped being some fantasy and turned into something that's actually way more valuable. A real human relationship with all its messiness and pain and genuine possibility. So what does any of this actually mean for you watching this right now? Maybe you've been through something kind of similar in your own life before. Maybe you felt that slow, gradual drift away from someone you once literally couldn't imagine ever living without. Maybe you've said some words you really wish you could somehow take back. Or maybe you stayed totally silent during moments when you really should have spoken up. The honest truth is that every single love story out there has chapters in it that never make it into the highlight reel people see. Moments filled with doubt and disappointment and really wondering if maybe you made the wrong choice all along. Blake and Gwen's whole story is this powerful reminder that even the couples we admire the most aren't anywhere close to perfect. They're just genuinely committed to working through all that imperfection together as a team. Fame definitely magnified all their struggles in ways most of us will never have to experience. Turned their private pain into public entertainment for millions to consume. But underneath all those headlines and all that wild speculation, They were really just two regular people trying to figure out if their love could actually survive everything life had decided to throw at them. And maybe that's honestly the most relatable thing about their entire story when you really think about it. Real healing doesn't ever happen on camera for people to watch. It happens in those quiet, private moments nobody else sees. In apologies that get whispered at midnight when nobody else is around. In making the hard decision to try just one more time, even when giving up completely, would honestly be so much easier. Blake and Gwen's relationship might never go back to exactly what it was before all this happened. But what it's slowly becoming now might actually end up being way stronger than before. Because now it's being built on real truth instead of just performance. If their story has taught us anything at all, it's probably this one simple truth. Even the absolute brightest fairy tales out there still carry shadows hiding within them somewhere. And sometimes those shadows are exactly where the real love actually lives. Not out there in the spotlight for everyone to see, but right there in the darkness that two people are willing